John Liu is here, and he's going to take us a little bit deeper into what Web3 is. So John Liu has 12 years of experience as a product executive and 10 years of experience as a portfolio manager. Today, he is the head of product for Amazon Web Services. He has a fully managed service that helps customers build quality and quickly with blockchain technology. Prior to AWS, John spent 4.5 years leading product and business development at public blockchain protocols with a heavy focus on cross-chain technology, DeFi, and NFTs. Prior to that, John gained deep financial expertise through his roles as chief product officer for fintech companies and portfolio manager at various hedge funds. Welcome, John.
All right. Well, slight correction from Megan's great intro. I'm sadly not the head of product of all AWS. I'm the head of product for AWS Web3 services. And yes, we do work with companies. They could be crypto native companies, big enterprise companies, all working with blockchain, which is one of the fundamental components of Web3. So in my session, I will be introducing Web3 and what it actually is. Dale did a very good job already setting the groundwork, talking about the different versions of the internet that led us to Web3. I'll spend a little more time on that. I'll also get into what are the major building blocks of Web3. Now, because this is a C-suite type of session, we're not going to talk too deeply about the underlying technology itself. But if you want to learn more about what consensus is, all the different layers of public blockchain there are, do find me at the cocktail afterwards. That's late in the evening. Then we're going to talk about what are the major use cases of Web3. And this is really a teaser for all the good content that you'll be hearing from over the next 2 days. So you'll get like a surface level view, but it'll set your imagination going as well. And these are actual applications that we're seeing from our customers. Some you read about in the news, some are still being built. So let's start with Web3. For us to understand what Web3 is, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the previous versions of the internet. And as Dale mentioned earlier, Web 1 was really a read type of experience. It existed in the years of 1990 to about 2005. And the constraint of a read-only experience was due to two things. One was it's an emerging technology, internet back in the days, and also the bandwidth. 56K modems could only process so much information. So this era was characterized by very few content creators and lots of content consumers. So you go to Web 1, you'd read web pages, GeoCity web pages. I spent a lot of time working on those. And also some early search web pages like Excite and Yahoo. Now, near 2005, near the tail end of Web 1, marketplaces started spinning up. So marketplaces where you could go buy physical goods. Websites such as pets.com, and of course, Amazon.com. Now, as technology continued to improve, right, both from a bandwidth perspective, servers, language gets more fancy, the web evolved to an interactive type of web page, where the content consumers could actually interact real time with the content creators and also increase the value of the network they were interacting with. So what does that actually mean? Think about social media, Facebook, Meta these days, or Twitter. The content consumers are contributing as much information and value to the networks as they are consuming from the networks themselves. However, like Web 1 before it, there are some limitations for Web 2. Web 2 gave us a very good experience, simple, fast, mobile. Right? Everyone could understand and interact with the internet. However, to do so, the companies that created it centralized or ended up controlling a lot of the data, information, and value that was created on the internet. Secondly, even the companies that are trying to create a more collaborative workflow, as Dale mentioned earlier, maybe it's co-opetition, but it's proper sharing of information between consumers and other businesses, are finding some limitations as to how easy they can share that information because the Web 2 was really sprung up amongst a siloed type of infrastructure, right? The siloed type of companies working. So this is giving the rise to what we call Web 3. And as mentioned earlier, it's really a read, write, and own internet, right? So you can interact with the internet, that's great. But can you share in the value that you create as a content consumer? can you share in the value that you create as a content creator? And as we'll see later on, and also throughout the rest of these 2 days, the answer is absolutely yes, right? The technology, fundamental technology, is there for us to use. There are really 4 guiding principles when you step up and think about what Web3 is trying to do. And these 4 guiding principles, when you take it to the fullest implementation, will result in something like a decentralized network, like Bitcoin. But for us, as we're thinking about what does this look like in an enterprise or a business workflow, or what does it look like in a mass adoption workflow, it's a balanced implementation of these 4 principles that will lead to success. We start with decentralization. And you take that with a grain of salt. It's not full chaos where everyone's running their own servers. It's actually a way where people can participate and share in the value that they create in an open source network, in an open network that can't be shut off. And the important thing that I want to take away from here is you can distribute value and information between not just the builders, but the users as well. Secondly, it's permissionless. Web3 is meant to have open and equal access. And I take this for granted a lot because I live in the US, but not everyone can join the internet, take advantage of all the fancy bank applications, social media applications that we have. Some is because of technology, some could be because of regulations or censorship. But if we want to create a cooperative environment to get to that fabled space that Dale was just showing about earlier, well, a permissionless network where everyone can work together and partake in that network is one of the necessary components. Third, this is an important one, it's native payments. The value layer is as much part of Web3 as the information layer. So when you think about Web 1 and Web 2, it was really built around distributing information, maybe business processes as well. And on top of Web 2, you had the value exchange layer. So you could put in some credit card payment rails on top of that, right? But with Web 3, the technology is already embedded within the protocol itself. And you see this in the form of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies could be the Bitcoins and Ethereum that you hear about. They could be stable coins, which are cryptocurrencies pegged to dollars. They could be central bank digital currencies, which are really stable coins, but issued by the central bank or the government. But it's all part of the actual protocol or the internet. Fourth, it's trustless. And this word is always kind of confusing for people. Wow, trustless, I can't trust it? No. What it's saying is, the Web3 principle does not overly rely on third-party trust services to connect siloed data or siloed business processes. Instead, it uses technology like smart contracts that you heard about earlier and economic incentives such as staking or maybe some type of reward mechanism that encourages the successful trust in making sure that technology can actually complete a transaction between peers. Now, Web3 is an emerging technology, but there are some encouraging stats that I like to show. So we start with the investments that's coming into this space, making this technology easier for people to use. In a survey done by McKinsey, about $50 billion has been invested in Web3 technology since the start of 2021. And different sources have different data, but they're all within 1 or 2 billion. What's a couple billion between friends these days? Like most of the softening economy, we are seeing a small slowdown in Web3 investments. In Q3, I think investment dropped by about 50%. In August, investments dropped about 50% to about 3 billion, but there's still a lot of capital that's now being deployed and spent on improving accessibility for Web3. When you think about businesses, in a survey done by Payments of about 200 companies with annual revenue over 250 million, for 80% of the companies who had annual revenue of over $1 billion are already integrating cryptocurrencies in some fashion. And usually that's in the form of taking payments. So we're seeing adoption from the business standpoint as well. Finally, from the consumers. According to Microsoft Work Trend Index for 2022, over 51% of the Gen Z, so those aged 10 to 25, expect some work to take place in the metaverse, which we'll see is a version of Web3. Now, hopefully the people that were interviewed in that Gen Z was 18 or above, not the 10-year-olds. It's kind of scary when you think about what 10-year-olds think about technology entertainment in the future. However, there are limitations with Web3. The first one, as Dale mentioned earlier, there are a lot of new concepts in this space. It's not just a new technology. It's not just nodes or servers or smart contracts. It's this concept of decentralization and trusting smart contracts and how all this work in a centralized way of thinking. So that already is a big barrier of entry. Second, the tools are still not ready for mass utilization. The foundations are there, and the helper tools are now getting built in. There's still a lot of heavy lifting that happens. You have to spin up your own nodes. What are even nodes even? But these are servers that connect to the blockchain, for example. You have to deal with a lot of the data mining that comes with blockchain. Just because the data is on the blockchain does not make it actually that easy to use. There's a lot of exhaust that's generated in data, and mining that data, make it insightful, is not as simple as the traditional databases, simply because of how data is stored on the blockchain. Third, this is kind of strange. Earlier I said blockchain is a trustless, or Web3 is a trustless type of principle. Here I am saying it's a low trust environment. So what's happening here is the technology itself is trustless. It's enabled this trustless functionality. However, because it's an emerging technology with limited regulations, there's a low trust environment occurring between counterparties. The other end might be unknown person. There might be an exploit. You see this on the news a lot, where some smart contract gets hacked. So it creates a low trust environment in the people that are operating on that. With proper regulation, proper innovation from big companies, creating a safe environment around that, that low trust environment is going to go away. All these three things lead to a very poor user experience. And when we think about the user experience, we're not just talking about the content consumers, the average retailer. We're talking about the builders as well. Like, I talk to some of the brightest people in big companies, and they just don't know how do you actually interact with the blockchain. It's too much heavy lifting to just send a transaction into a blockchain. So these are four things that are kind of holding back Web3 adoption. But there's good news, right? That's what the $50 billion we heard about earlier was for. It's meant to raise these concerns and actually remove the concerns from adoption. Now, before getting into the actual fundamental building blocks of Web3, I do want to spend a little time on this concept of decentralization. We hear a lot on the headlines news that decentralization is freedom to the people. It's the end of companies. We don't need companies like AWS anymore. However, I would like to take a more balanced approach. The reality is, systems today are already decentralized. Dale mentioned earlier, like there are a lot of shipping companies. It requires a lot of counterparties to work together. That's a form of decentralization. When you think about banking and how they work together to settle a trade at the end of the day and trust each other to make sure that data is actually, that each other's orders are actually settled, that's another form of decentralization. So in a way, systems today are already decentralized, and they're simply looking for better technology to help them in their continued journey to collaborate. The mass consumer, as they think about Web3, still trust the big brand names, right? In general, they might not like the big brand names, right? There's a lot of pushback on, wow, you control a lot of our data. But that's going to change the minute the big brand names start sharing that data in a transparent and secure fashion. And Web3 is one of those technologies that can help in that aspect. Finally, when you think about Web3, it's just a technology, right? At the end of the day, technology needs experts. And people in this room are experts in many different fields. You could be technology experts. You could be brand experts. You could be data experts. That's not going away. It's simply evolving for Web3. So, good news is, we're all still going to exist in 20 years, right? We're not going to be replaced by the individuals running servers in their warehouse or anything like that. But we do have to adapt to the changing needs of the consumer and also changing needs of businesses. So what are the major building blocks of Web3? Well, I'll talk about three of the major drivers of Web3, and then we'll step back and talk about kind of the Web3 stack, the building stack. Start with cryptocurrency payments. which is really just digital currencies, and enables a faster way to send value between counterparties. It's come a long way since the early days, 2010, when the first crypto payment was made. I'm sure many of you heard. 10,000 Bitcoin was paid for a slice, well, actually for a pizza from Papa John's. That's worth a good $200 million today. Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all the major payment providers have started integrating cryptocurrencies as a strategic part of their business. When you think about Visa, in Q1 they processed about $2.1 billion in cryptocurrency transactions, which is about 71% more than did in 2020. MasterCard just about, I think yesterday, announced something with Paxos, where they're going to help institutions and banks deal with cryptocurrencies. So if the major payment providers are starting to invest in this space and think this is a way to reach consumers and businesses of the future, I think it's something that we should pay attention to. Second, I want to talk about decentralized finance, which at the end of the day is really taking the existing financial system, or one that I come from deeply, bonds and CDS, loans and exchanges, and putting it onto a Web3 or decentralized protocol or framework. Now, decentralized finance, what it's done is it's added on to the digital payments, which started as a value store and a value payment, and put in all the additional financial instruments that we all need to do businesses, right? For example, let's just build decentralized lending applications where they're controlled not by third party. Lending applications aren't controlled by a single third party, but they're controlled by code or smart contract. And that is one of those foreign concepts, right, that we have to wrap our heads around. How does this work? It's something in the open source, something in the public. There are no people behind it running anymore. They deploy this program and it runs by itself. And people deposit money and the loans all run by themselves. No banks required. Right. Then we move on to non-fungible tokens. And this got a lot of press in the last year. And I have to say, I was surprised at how quickly it pushed adoption into enterprise companies across luxury, media, fashion. It was just like it was a wave of adoption. Enterprises who were afraid to touch public blockchain before, jumped in a matter of months because there was something tangible about NFTs or non-fungible tokens, which represent unique goods or unique assets. It was something that you could see, a collectible, an art, something that merchandise companies could sell, jackets, digital twins, right? So this actually is kind of opened the floodgates for more diverse blockchain applications versus the first two were very much focused on financial applications, digital payments and DeFi. And NFTs do exist beyond just static collectibles. And this is why a lot of the companies, maybe the Starbucks, the Nikes, the Adidas, they're so very excited by what non-fungible tokens can do. They start with a static use case. It's just for display. It's just an exchange. It's a cryptocurrency that tracks this static good that can be seen and displayed by people. However, because it's programmable, like almost everything on the blockchain itself, you can add certain actions to it. If you're in a game, you can get them to breed or grow or actually interact and level up. And this allows people to create an interactive experience, a multi-channel engagement experience using NFTs. And you kind of wrap that together with some of the payments and some of the decentralized finance applications I talked about earlier. And you'll hear about in the next 2 days. You start seeing why Web3 can actually bring new ways of doing business between businesses and between business and consumers. So now we know about the 3 adoption drivers. What are the Web3 building blocks? Well, at the very bottom layer is blockchain. That's why Dale was mentioning blockchain so much. This is the basic open source infrastructure that people can build upon. It's standardized, it's programmable, and it can be upgraded as well. It can exist both in private format and in public format. It just depends on which use case you're looking to actually achieve. On top of this, you have DeFi, or decentralized finance, which I talked about earlier. This creates the economy for you to build a Web3 around. You supplement that with non-fungible tokens, and now you have something to mark unique assets that you can sell. They could be semi-unique assets as well. You know, there are so many. There's probably like thousands upon thousands of this shirt that I have, right? But it's this type of pattern, this type of brand. That makes a semi-fungible type of token that can be represented with NFTs. Now we're starting to push a little into the further, like the out there type of concepts with Web3. Decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. So you'll hear a little bit about this, but when you step back, it's just a series of smart contracts that let separate entities collaborate better together, right? How can we actually govern things that we equally share? How can we introduce changes to a system that is equally shared among different counterparties? Some of them are in a competitive state. Well, that's what DAOs are good for. Then you have decentralized services. And just like you have centralized services for sharing data, for storing data, there are also decentralized services such as interplanetary file system. It still exists on this world, sadly, but IPFS, where you can store files in a decentralized storage system. And this one is an important one, decentralized identity. So we're so very used to carrying our identity, my driver's license in my wallet. I'm very used to having my identity safely stored behind, let's say, Google or Amazon. But what will this look like when you move to a Web3 world? When everything or many things are built on a public blockchain and it's open and people can see, right? And my identity is not me as a person, but anonymous wallets. There has to be a way that can combine my identity, me as a person, safely with the anonymous wallets on Web3. And that's what decentralized identities are. On top of these components, you can build the custody and access layer. Typically, this is in the form of wallets. And there's a lot of good technology that's coming out of Web3 that goes beyond just providing wallets. Multi-party compute, which you might hear about, which has multiple people kind of granting access to certain assets inside a wallet, can be used beyond just cryptocurrencies. They can be used for signing secure documents as well. Then you have all the applications in VR that sit on top of it, which leads us to the metaverse, right? This billion-dollar opportunity, according to JP Morgan. They predict that it's going to be a huge enterprise in the next 10 years. But why is that the case? Because this is going to be something where social connection takes place, not just for entertainment, but also for work. And this metaverse is being driven by the emerging habits of both businesses and consumers. But what is metaverse as a technology? Is it really Web3? Why do we hear it so often kind of lumped together? Well, let's look at the technology that the metaverse needs to build this rich interactive experience. First, you need a network that is interoperable. You want to create worlds that are not just siloed off from each other. If you want digital work experience, digital entertainment experience, and I as the consumer can travel seamlessly between those two, you need an interoperable network. Second, because this is supposed to encompass so many aspects of our life, but in a digital version, asset ownership and asset exchange should be native to the technology that supports the metaverse. And third, we've learned from our past, right? Web 2, we know that the consumers are getting more sensitive about their data. So build ahead with a consumer-first principle of what's the proper shared ownership of privacy and data. So when you think of these three principles, really, metaverse is using Web3 technology, which answers our question. So metaverse is a type of Web3. Now let's look a little bit into Web3 and businesses, how it can help you grow your business. And really, at the highest level, it helps both fronts. It helps on business-to-business relationships, where you can share information, collaborate with other businesses better. It gets you that global scale that was mentioned a little earlier. It also helps you reach the consumers of the future, right? The digital consumer. So we'll start with Web3 and finance. And there's a natural marriage between these two concepts because the economy itself that we operate is constantly looking for more efficient ways to operate in a digital world. And it's kind of held back in its journey right now as it's going through this digital journey. First, it's being built on a lot of siloed systems, right? There's a lot of heavy data matching that has to be done. And this introduces inefficiencies such as additional cost. My favorite example is actually wiring cash. I do this quite a bit, but it cost me $25 to wire cash. overseas. There's the person who I send to gets charged another $15. And then it takes about 7 days to actually get the wire transfer complete. And maybe 10% of my wire transfers get rejected because there's some additional and necessary KYC steps that happen in the middle. And I'm not saying Web3 is going to replace 100% of that, because some of the protection needs to be there. But I think Web3 can shorten down the transaction time to maybe within a day. Right? I know when I send cryptocurrency payment, that settles in seconds, right? But let's put in some of those KYCs, and let's take, maybe an extra hour or so to make sure I'm sending it to the right place. Second, there's a growing cost of regulatory compliance, right? And this is partially due to consumer privacy, such as GDPR, but it's also due to some of the crises that we've emerged from. 2008, Lehman crisis, 2012, I think the European crisis, has put a very heavy reporting burden on top of finance. And this is a challenge for most businesses to actually operate in. I think according to PwC, over $1 million is spent by companies just going through regulatory, just getting their regulatory compliance done every year. Finally, for all the global reach that finance has managed to accomplish, there's still a substantial population that is called unbanked, or outside of the financial system today, which is about 25% of the world population. So how can DeFi help with this? Well, there's these digital smart contracts that increase the velocity of money. And from the earlier session, we know if the money gets out there faster and you can reuse it again faster, that's good for all businesses, and it's good for the economy as well. So smart contracts and kind of efficient settlement on a blockchain allows that to happen. Second, you don't have to build everything from the ground up because it's open source. There are all these, we'll call them widgets and smart contracts out there that can already be used, and they're battle tested, right? They're settling billions of dollars a day. Don't pick every smart contract out there. Pick the ones that are kind of been tested, run through the ropes. Third, cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, digital assets, they do present a different type of asset class, a new form of diversification as well as payment. And fourth, blockchain and Web3 actually simplifies a lot of the compliance because of two things. One, it's built on a transparent network within the permission parties, of course, but that history is always there. And two, because cryptocurrencies can be programmed, you can embed a lot of rich history with that cryptocurrency. Right? So if I want to track which asset this particular asset has interacted with in the past, what was the value of this asset in the past, it can now all be easily linked to something that's on a blockchain. Next, we'll look at Web3 and consumer engagement. The digital experience, independent creators, entertainment, those are all important aspects for the consumer and businesses of the future. According to Deloitte, about 70% of US consumers surveyed follow influencers online. They get their buying and get their purchase habits by following these influencers. It's not like when I grew up, whenever Nicole Kidman said something, I'm like, wow, I gotta go and do something that Nicole Kidman does. Or same thing with Tom Cruise, I gotta go buy that cool jeans. 41% of US consumers actually spend more time with user-generated content. It could be TikTok videos. Those are the ones that come up a lot. So independent creators and their communities are going to be very important for media companies and actually any brand name of the future. And this one, I wish I had stayed as a video game player in college, but video games is the #1 entertainment activity for Gen Z. Again, when we think about the next 20 years, like who's going to be driving purchase habits? Well, it's Gen Z, right? So if they expect video games to be their #1 entertainment, they expect digital experiences, which also kind of links together why they expect 51% of their work to take place in the metaverse in some form or fashion. So what can Web3 do using NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, decentralized finance, or DeFi? Well, let's take an example here. We'll say that there's a content and distribution platform. It could be music, it could be media, it doesn't matter. You can take an NFT and you can create engagement between the physical and digital channels. I mentioned earlier, digital twins, right? You can take any physical item and create a digital version of that. Or you can use it in a smart fashion to take a digital token to drive physical engagement at a store, for example. I buy an NFT online, it unlocks when I'm within a certain location or at a certain movie event. It can increase the purchase of both your digital and physical goods. And by these goods, I mean direct goods, as in like they could be clothes or merchandise, or goods that support the technology behind Web3. For example, VR hardware, right? If I happen to be selling VR glasses and I'm actually building a metaverse type of world, it's a great way for me to drive purchases across both of those. This part, very important. With NFTs and DeFi, now that I've kind of given out this non-fungible token, I can also continually engage with the consumer. It's not a one and done thing, right? It's now with the consumer, and when you program it and it grows based on certain type of actions that I, as a business, would like the consumer to take, I'm creating continued engagement with that consumer. At the same time, I can take these NFTs and combine them with DeFi to create an open source investment, a crowdsourcing ability, right? When it comes to getting the fans to connect to their creators. Music does this quite a bit. One of our customers, Global Rockstar, actually uses this to crowdsource investment for music, independent music artists from their fans. You know, they buy NFTs, and as the revenues of those record level comes in, they all get to participate in those revenues along with the artists they help sponsor. Third, independent creators that I mentioned earlier on, they get to participate more in the value that they create as well. And they get to participate in the community they create. They can create NFT type of special offerings to their consumers, to their fans. And that's very important because from earlier, remember, over 41%, right, are following independent generated content. Finally, it's important for collaboration between brands, right? It's a collaborative environment. We have to scale globally. So with NFTs, which are built on an open interoperable network, I can take what I earned, let's say at Adidas, and then I can somehow apply it when I go and buy a car. Maybe it's Ferrari. Maybe I got a branded Adidas shoe that also happens to be Ferrari. Actually, I think it's Puma. Ferrari and Puma are the two that actually collaborated well together. But now you can do this through digital aspects as well as the physical. So let's just take through a sample movie run and see what that looks like. And we'll be fast. You can say, launch an exclusive digital collectible, which is actually a movie ticket. The digital collectible reveals itself when you go and watch the movie. Digital collectible, once revealed, gives you the ability as a consumer to purchase a physical jacket or special branded type of merchandise. And it also unlocks in-game assets in one of your gaming studios that you're partnering with. So now you're starting to see, this is multi-channel, multi-brand, right? And finally, you can create a continued experience with the consumer by having them continue to do actions, gamifying them, right? So you level up the NFT as well. So it's really a multi-purpose tool, these non-fungible tokens that are on Web3 can be. And we'll talk very briefly about these other use cases because you're going to hear a lot more about them in the next 2 days. Number one, supply chain. I think Dale talked a lot about how Web3 can help with supply chain illumination and management. And we hear from customers, both on the private enterprise side and also from a public standpoint, about how they can bring supply chain illumination and efficiencies by using Web3. Document management. I would have thought this has been solved, but with Google Docs, with Microsoft Word, but it's still an issue, especially when you have multiple parties working on the same document, signing on that document. Are they working on the right version? Do the right people have the right roles to it? Web3 can help with that. And finally, identity and sensitive data sharing. I mentioned decentralized identity earlier, but a lot of the technology underlying Web3 with cryptography, with permission access to data, can help with identity management, especially when it comes to healthcare. So I think that wraps up my overview of Web3 and business cases. I think I'll just say at the end, the Web3 foundation's already here, right? The technology is there for us to use, but it's still early, right? So expect to do some kind of some innovation along with these technologies and keep trying to find that single use case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. This morning we have heard so much. To give us a